Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today we have another hand from my World Series of Poker main event last year. Here we are facing an under the gun +1 raise. This was a relatively straightforward player who seemed to play well enough. And then I have King, Queen offsuit in the hijack seat. This is a situation where I should either 3-bet or fold the vast majority of the time. You don't really want to be flat calling from the hijack seat with big offsuit cards in general. The only one that I think makes some sense is Ace Queen offsuit, but Ace Jack offsuit, King Queen offsuit, King Jack, King Jack, Ace 10. Those are hands that you would much rather just fold or 3-bet, because when you call, you're somewhat likely to be dominated, whereas when you 3-bet, you get your opponent to fold sometimes when they don't have a great hand, and very often they are just going to call, and when they just call, they're going to check fold on a lot of flops. So this is a situation where I prefer to 3-bet or fold, and I'm 3-betting King Queen offsuit basically every time here. The nice thing about King Queen offsuit, or Ace Jack offsuit, or even Ace Queen offsuit, is that it makes it harder for your opponent to have one of the very premium hands, right? You block Ace King, Ace Queen, Kings, and Queens. And those are all hands that would never fold, right? So by 3-betting a hand with a King and a Queen in it, it makes it more likely that when your opponent did raise, that they had one of the weaker hands in their range. Obviously, they could still have Ace, King, Kings, and Queens, but it's a little bit less likely, and that does matter. So, folds back around to the opponent, he calls. By the way, when I do re-raise, I'm making about 3 times the opponent's initial raise. That's nice and standard. You may opt to make it a little bit bigger. Like he made it 7, maybe I should make it 23 if I think that gives me significantly more fold equity. Because when we do re-raise here, we don't want to get called. It's not like we're re-raising for value or anything like that. We're re-raising to try to get a fold immediately or on a post-flop betting round. So if your opponent does fold immediately, if you make it just a little bit more pre-flop, that's usually a pretty good success. So I could definitely see making it a little bit bigger being valuable. Flop comes 8, 4, 3, 2 diamonds. I have no diamond. Opponent checks. I'm going to bet this flop every time with my entire range. And my entire range here is going to be aces, kings, queens, maybe jacks, ace, king, and then a few bluffs with a few suited connected hands, and king, queen, and ace, jack offsuit. So whenever you do bet with your nut hands, like aces, you're just happy to get your money in. And when you bet with a hand like king, queen, if you do get raised, you're going to fold. But usually you're not going to get raised all that often because it's so easy for me to have pocket aces, right? So this is a spot where I like betting frequently and small. I would actually prefer even a smaller bet than this. I bet 20 into 47. I think a bet of more like 14 is probably a little bit better. That allows me to continue bluffing the turn a little bit cheaper, and it doesn't risk my stack quite as much. So I like this bet. Opponent does call, which is a bit of a bummer. Turn is a 3. So it is worth mentioning that when the opponent calls the flop bet, I think their range is still going to be pretty wide. I don't think people are folding hands like ace king or ace queen or ace jack to a flop bet. So that means I need to consider triple barreling some portion of the time. So the question is, what are my best draws or hands without showdown value to triple barrel? Well, typically you want to triple barrel the hands with they either have a good blocker to your opponent's calling range. And notice here we block kings and queens, which are hands that may raise and not 4-bet preflop. So that's good. And we also want to have a lack of showdown value, which, king, queen does. If I did have a hand like 9-7 of diamonds, I would definitely bluff that hand first. And I could have 9-7 of diamonds sometimes. Maybe jack 9 of diamonds. Those are hands that I may 3-bet every once in a while. So I do have a few combinations of flush draws. But if you think about it, I really don't have very many worse hands here, right? Because ace jack is better than this hand, so I don't need to bluff that as often. And ace jack doesn't block kings or queens, two of the very obvious hands that my opponent will call down with. So of the hands I want to bluff, I think king queen fits very nicely in that range. So the next question is, do you want to have a bluffing range at all? And I think the answer is yes. I think if anything, in the World Series of Poker main event, this is a good time to bluff when your opponents take passive lines, because no one in the whole world who plays the World Series of Poker main event wants to bust the main event. If anything, people play very tightly when their whole stack is at risk, in my experience. So you want to make them risk their stack. And in this position, against a reasonably competent player, I want to play as if I had aces. So what would I do if I had aces? Well, pot's 87,000. So I want to make a bet of about 40,000. I think that's pretty nice. That's going to put my opponent in a tricky scenario. And notice that if I do bet that amount and he calls, pot's going to go up to 170K. And that's how much he has behind, which will allow me to make a river jam as a bluff, which is my plan. So he does call. River is now a king. So this is interesting because at this point, I actually have a lot of showdown value. So now do I need to bluff? Well, I obviously don't need to bluff, so checking behind makes some sense. Next question is, do I actually need to value bet? I don't know. I think it's close. At this point, I can pretty easily discount ace-king because, well, there's a king in my hand, a king on the board, and I bet the turn and my opponent called. So ace-king can get discounted. What about pocket aces? I think we can kind of discount pocket aces because that 4-bet's pre-flop. So that means I have the best hand, unless my opponent has exactly pocket 8s, pocket 4s, pocket 3s that slow played. Or I suppose the one combination of pocket kings. So now I'm basically trying to get called by queens, jacks, 10s, 9s. So how much will queens, jacks, 10s, 9s call on this river? I think the answer is probably a small bet. Pot's 167K. We have 170K left. I think if I bet 40,000 here, maybe 55,000, a lot of players will still find a call in that scenario. Now, if you think for some reason your opponent will almost always fold the underpairs, then betting makes no sense whatsoever. Also, if you think your opponent's ever going to check raise you all in with a bluff, then betting that size is especially not good because I don't want to bet and then call off in this spot because I actually could be against pocket kings or a slow play pocket aces or the 8s, 4s, or 3s, right? So what do we do? Well, the safe play, the play that may lead to less profit but definitely makes your life easier, is to just check. Because in poker tournaments against good, strong, competent players who can raise the river as a bluff, you really don't want to be in that spot. But against most players who are a little bit weak, a little bit tight, a little bit passive, who are not going to check raise, bluff all in on the river, when I could just easily have kings myself and I could easily have aces, right? Against players like that who are not going to bluff, then value betting is kind of free because your opponent's going to play very straightforwardly and they very often will call a small bet. They'll make you cry and call with a hand like jacks. So I think I like a small bet. I bet 78,000 out of my 170K stack, and I think this is too much. I would have much preferred a 50,000 bet if I am thinking that my opponent will literally never bluff. One nice thing about betting a little bit bigger like this, like 78K, is that now we are going to get bluffed all in even less often because I'll be getting such great odds to call, right? Like, for example, imagine I bet 130K out of my 170K stack. Unless the opponent's just really bad, it's like, oh, well, if I'm putting in 130, I might as well put in all my money. If they're thinking like that, then clearly this idea goes out the window. But whenever you bet bigger, your opponents are typically going to bluff you less often because when you bet bigger, you should be more polarized, right? And if you're polarized, that means you just have plenty of nut hands in your range that are not folding ever. I go 78K, though, and I think I probably would have preferred 50K or just check. It's very important to realize, in tournaments, you really don't want to risk going broke, and you also really don't want to cut down the playability of your stack. Now, the nice thing about this bet is that even if I do get called and lose, or if I get jammed on, I'm still going to have 30 big blinds left. And while 30 big blinds is not a ton, and I know the average stack in the main event is often 100 big blinds or more, 30 big blinds is still a very playable stack, and I know how to play it well, so I'm not so worried about that. So that led me to make this bet. If I made this bet and I would have something like 12 big blinds left, I'd be way less inclined to make that because then you lose a lot of your playability. So anyway, I do 78K, and, well, the disaster happens. We get jammed all in. That is brutal. So now we have to call 100K more into a pot that will be 515K or so. So we have to win roughly 20% of the time here. Do we win 20% of the time? Well, from all my experience, I would tell you no. I would tell you that this opponent almost certainly has exactly pocket kings, pocket 8s, pocket 4s, or pocket 3s. Almost every time. If he's very good, perhaps he does have a hand like Jack 10 of diamonds every once in a while. But I just did not get the vibe from this particular player that he would be bluffing me. I actually hoped he bluffed me. That would make me rethink my life. But if the guy just had like a set of 8s, then, whatever. This is a situation where I actually think it's kind of close for the opponent if he does have a hand like pocket 8s, or especially pocket 4s to raise. Not that I have pocket 8s all that often, but I will have kings when I take this line. And notice if I had a hand like queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, I would definitely not bet the river. So when I do bet this river here, I'm betting literally king, queen, ace, king, aces, and kings. And if I'm folding king, queen, I'm also folding ace, king, then in theory, bluffing becomes really nice because I'm actually folding out way too many combinations to a bluff check raise here on the river, right? Because I need to defend with 80-ish% of my range. And I'm clearly only defending with kings, and that's it. So I'm actually drastically over-folding here, even if I'm folding a hand like ace-king and king-queen. So it's a cool spot where the opponent, if he knew my exact strategy, should be bluffing me every time. Please don't start check raising me all in on every river. That's not what I want in my life. But if the opponent knew my strategy here, they definitely should check raise all in, because I can tell you I'm going to fold here. Because I do think that people drastically underbluff here, and if people drastically underbluff, I, in turn, should drastically overfold my value bets that lose to the few obvious nut combinations. So anyway, from a GTO point of view, this is probably a call. But not in this world. We just fold. And we leave ourselves with 31 big blinds in the main event. What a bummer. And I have no clue what the opponent had. He seemed just like really confident, like, haha, gotcha whenever he jammed me. And I mean, look, this is a big assumption. Maybe this guy will write in and say, haha, gotcha, I actually had 9-7 at diamonds. But I'm pretty sure he just had a hand like pocket eights or pocket fours. And so yeah, that's it. And I was going to go back to the idea that if I am literally only calling here with pocket kings and pocket eights, then if my opponent did have a hand like pocket fours, he actually should not jam me on the river, right? Because then he's only getting called, or mostly getting called, when he loses. Not that he can know my strategy, but if he knows I'm drastically overfolding, then he should not raise with fours, because if I call, I'm going to have kings, right? So cool spot where my opponents should be bluffing me out of my seat. And also a neat spot, if I know my opponents are at least capable of bluffing in this spot, I should be way more inclined to check behind the river. Because if it goes check, check on the river, still 170k left or something like that, right? Which was a very playable stack, 57 big blinds. And this very easily could have been a mistake. But I really did get the vibe I had the best hand on the river a ton. And I thought if I bet a medium size, the opponent would call. But this one didn't work out. And every hand he plays is not going to work out. So that's going to be it for this video for Poker News. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, share it with your friends. Tell all them that I will value bet thin on the river and then fold to a raise. That way, I can just start value betting with the river only with the nuts, get raised out of my seat, I can easily call. So spread this like wildfire, or don't spread it at all, one of the two. Either I don't want anyone to know this happened, so I can keep value betting thin, or I want everyone to know this happened, so that I can only value bet with the nuts. Either one's fine. Don't share it just a little bit. Thanks a lot. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you next time.